Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. All right, we are back after a little bit of a hiatus with traveling and all sorts of other stuff happening.
That's right. It was a good summer. Good conferences. You got to take a little bit of time, do some vacationing with your family. Stuff's important.
Yep, got to have that work-life balance, right? It's very important.
And now things are cooling down a little bit. Days are getting shorter. And school's back in session.
Yep, school is back. My kids are not excited, but it is what it is. I keep telling them this is their job. They have to do it.
Yeah, and we've already passed the planting season. Well, for most things. We went through the summer. That would be the pest season. And now we are getting close to harvest season.
Yeah, well, the harvest has been going on for a lot of things, but one of the things that you can still plant right now is grass, and we're actually getting into the prime grass planting season. So if you were looking to improve your lawn or your pasture fields, now is a great time to look into getting some new grass seed out there.
That's right. Some cool season grasses and possibly some cover crops if that's what you want to do. It's never good to have bare soil, especially over winter. There are certain varieties of cover crops that you can sow right now. One of which is one that I really like, is crimson clover. It is a winter annual. Grows really well, great at soil remediation, and it's a great way to keep a good cover over the winter.
That's right. Yeah, and like what Dan said, it's really important to keep your soil covered, and that helps to improve the soil structure. It helps to maintain drainage for your soil, and it also helps to maintain all of those lovely little organisms that are working so hard for you all year round to help transfer those minerals into plant available nutrients.
That's right. And speaking of soils, this is also one of those great times to do some soil remediation as well. And I know one of my favorite sayings is, or my favorite question that I get is, Dan, when is the best time to do a soil test? And I usually say the best time is after harvest, when the soil is just kind of resting. It's already pushed out everything it needs to, and you're kind of starting from a good point where you could do the soil test and figure out what's going on. But the thing is, as well, there is never a bad time to soil test. There is a best time, but there's never really a bad time.
That's exactly right. Yeah, there's no bad time to do it. Well, actually, I'm going to take that back. There is a bad time to do a soil test, and that is directly after you have added a fertilizer or some manure or fresh compost. That's a bad time to soil test, because that's not going to give you very accurate results, because those haven't had time to break down into the soil yet and become part of the general soil. So you're going to get a really wonky soil test. And one of the things that can be off when you do things like that is your pH. And as we have said on many times before, your pH is really one of the most important results you're going to get back from your soil test.
That is absolutely true. And this is why now is a good time to do it. Not a great time to put nitrogen down. Great time to do a soil test and figure out what's there as far as your phosphorus and your potassium is concerned, and even calculate some nitrogen needs, figure out the organic matter. But your pH now is going to be the pH that you're going to see in the spring. And now is the best time to amend that pH to get something that you like. And when we talk about pH and liming, it's soil chemistry. We're talking about the acidity of the soil. So it's typically in a scale of 0 to 14. It's a pH scale, 7 being neutral. below 7 being acidic and above 7 being alkaline. And most plants like just below 7 at that 6 range, most things. Blueberries like it even more acidic. And there are a few plants that like above 7, but most of them prefer a little bit acidic, just like our bodies, right? Our bodies are slightly acidic. Plants like that as well.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize that your soil pH will naturally change over time, especially in places that have a lot of rainfall. And because that rainfall is going to, water is the universal solvent, right? So it is going to absorb some of those calcium ions and some of the other things that are in the soil, and they're going to grab onto them and they're going to kind of wash them away. So over time, your soil will become more acidic. And so when you look at the area where we are, which is in the foothills of the Appalachian mountain chain, that's some really old soil right there, and so it's been around for a long time. Plus, we do get a lot of rainfall. And so our soils that have broken down from that mountain chain have a lot of clay, but they're also highly acidic.
That's right. Yeah, and around here we have a very thick what do you call it? Parent material of a sandstone, and that gives away to more acidic type soils. Out west, and I say out west as in Western Ohio, and even a little bit beyond that even, but I can't say how far it goes. But we're like, at least in this state, you have one side that's kind of a sandstone type parent material, and on the other side you have a limestone parent material for your soils. That one tends to stay a lot more neutral and alkaline than on this side. So on this side, it generally just kind of stays acidic. Other contributing factors are things like organic matter composition. You got a lot of those organic acids. Soil amendments make it acidic. A lot of rains, plant material breaking down, that can cause acidity. So our soils on this side of the state do tend to fall into the acidic portion of the pH scale, and it does like to dip kind of in the 5s, sometimes a little bit below that even. So, at that kind of pH, you're going to see a major difference when you amend it and kind of bring it up to that 6 to 6.5, where most nutrients are more available, where the plant chemistry works better, and that's where you're going to see the most benefit from any amendment that you do.
Yeah, I have a farmer who is converting some woodland into an orchard area. And, he went and got his soil test done. This is an oak hickory forest cover type, so you have some fairly acidic trees dropping their leaves there, and the soil pHs that he got were pretty standardly 4.7, 4.9, so pretty acidic soils. And so it's going to take some time to get that amended. And when you're doing a soil test and you're converting from one land cover type into another, you have to recognize that everything takes time, and you may have to apply lime more than once to get that end result that you desire. But it's really important to not just add a whole boatload of lime. Like, you don't want to add 4 tons of lime per acre at one time. That's just too much. You're going to get a lot of it that's washed off, and it's not going to have the ability to work its way down into the soil. So 2 tons per acre is really kind of the upper limit of what you want to apply in a single season.
Yeah, and also once you're applying at those high rates, it's very important to, if possible, incorporate it in. Because like Karen was saying, most of the times you just apply it superficially, and that can be fine, because typically you're going to have things growing there. You're going to have forages. You're going to have a growing crop on the ground while you're applying the lime, and that tends to hold things in place. But if you start, if it looks like a snowstorm, then incorporating does help keep it in place as well. So those are things to think about when you are liming. But let's bring this back one step.
Before we go back too far, I just wanted to add on to that incorporating also will help the reaction work better overall because you're going to have more soil contact and it's going to have more opportunities to embed that lime and get it mixed into all of the other soil chemicals that are down there. So yeah, if you are, especially this time of year, great time to add lime, incorporate it in, throw in a cover crop, you'll be great for next year. Now you can go back.
And I do want to take a step back because, we talk about adjusting the pH, and there are plenty of kits out there that you can use to test the pH and see what it is, but that is the actual pH of the soil, not taking into account the soil chemistry that is going to have a buffering effect. It's basically going to fight the change in the pH. So when you do a pH test from a kit where you're just taking a little bit of soil and you're putting in the indicators in there, you don't take into account that buffering pH. And that buffering pH requires so much lime to get over that chemistry hump there that will keep buffering it back to then see the results and be able to actually change that chemistry of that soil. So if you really want to do a good job and an accurate job in liming and making sure that you have enough lime, it is recommended that you do a soil test from a chemistry lab. That way, when they calculate how much lime you need, they also take into account the buffering effect so that you aren't just putting in a little bit of lime that you think should be enough, but really won't change the pH at all because you're going to have to get over that buffering capacity of that soil. So if you're going to change the pH of your soil, make sure you have an accurate amount of lime calculated with a good soil test.
That's right. And, that's the greatest thing about getting a soil test from a lab is they not only tell you what is going on with your soil, what the nutrient levels are, but they also tell you what you need and how much of what you need and give you those recommendations based on the crop that you're trying to produce and what your soil type is and what your expected productivity per acre is. And all of those things go together in a soil test that's done by a lab to give you the recommendations so that you do have a positive result. I mean, you can look up a chart that says, oh, my pH is 6.5. I need to add 0.4 tons per acre of lime. But if you're not taking into account how much clay is in your soil and what the buffering capacity of that particular soil is, you're not going to be getting the correct response in the soil to the product that you're adding. And so you want to make sure that you're getting the most value out of the products that you're putting into your land. And so not only are you going to make sure that you're putting the right amounts on, but if you need more, you can go back and test again and keep doing that until you get your soil to the right level.
That's right. And let's actually define what lime is. So lime is calcium bicarbonate, and it's that bicarbonate that really does the neutralizing in there, and the calcium is just a way to keep it in a salt type form. And I say salt as in a solid, a cation and an anion, not sodium. So let's make sure that people understand that sodium is never a good thing to amend soil with ever.
No.
So calcium carbonate is what we use for lime. When you're looking at lime, there are all kinds of different lime, and there's grades that limes have based on mainly the percent moisture and the fineness of the grind, because that is the secret there. If you can buy limestone, right, gravel, and limestone is calcium bicarbonate, right? It's what it is. However,
Right.
it's so big that it cannot break down at the rate that your soil acidifies. So you can put as much as you want, and your soil's never going to change because it's just not going to break down and neutralize anything because it's so big. So one thing you have to understand is there are grades of lime. And when you do a soil test, what they will recommend is ag lime. So there's a certain ag grade that has to do with the fineness that's calculated by the amount of calcium carbonate that goes through a mesh. and there are standards. But if you see ag lime grade, it's going to have an effective neutralizing power of 2,000 pounds per ton, which means that when it calls for 1,000 pounds an acre, so a half a ton an acre, you can be rest assured that if you put 1,000 pounds in that acre of that grade, then that will neutralize it to the point that the lab calculated. If your effective neutralizing power is 530 over 2,000, you need to put approximately 4 times as much, because what you have is you have 530 pounds per 2,000 tons of equivalent neutralizing power. So you need approximately 4 times the amount. So, and that could be based on moisture content, or that could be based on the mesh sizes. So that ENP is what it's called. The effective neutralizing power is very important to make sure that you're getting the right amount of lime to actually do the neutralizing process of your soil.
Right. And with our tests through WVU, the results we give you are based on a 100% CCE equivalency. So that basically means that we're expecting that you will be using lime calcium carbonate or calcite or CaCO3. Now, that has a 100% calcium carbonate equivalent, but there are a lot of other things out there. Like, for instance, if you're going with a dolomitic limestone because your magnesium is a little low, that has calcium and magnesium in it, and its CCE is 110. And so you're going to use a little bit less of that to get the results. So it's not just, okay, you need 2 tons per acre, and okay, regardless of what I'm buying, I'm going to, like, if I buy a magnesium carbonate, it's got a CCE of 119. Those numbers need to be calculated back into your overall volume. So you have to keep a couple things in mind. Like Dan said, you got to pay attention to how much will pass through a 100 mesh sieve. If it just says greater than 50%, that's kind of suspect. You don't necessarily want to go that route. You want more information than that. But you also have to pay attention to what kind of neutralizing material you're looking at.
That's right. And ag grain or ag, I can't even talk.
Ag grade.
Ag grade lime will pass through. So the finest percent passing through mesh size, you will have you'll have 100% of 60, 20, and 8% mesh size going through that. So if you're buying something at a co-op or an agricultural store that says agricultural lime, there are standards in place from USDA. So if it says agricultural lime, you should feel assured that it has an ENP of 2,000 pounds per ton. So you are able to calculate a 1-for-1 based on most reputable soil tests. But if that, if you're getting it from other places, and another example is that, like, wastewater lime. Wastewater lime is 75% moisture, and that's really what takes into account the difference in that effective neutralizing power, in terms of a tonnage pound, like a weight basis. So that's where you have to take into account that it might be if the moisture percentage was 0, it actually would be about 2,000 pounds per ton of an EMP, so an EMP of 1. But because it has so much water in it, you have to take that water weight in consideration when you're calculating how much you're putting down. So it's just things to pay attention to. Again, if you're going to buy lime at a co-op or an ag store, chances are you're buying the right stuff. In ag grade is what you're looking for there. So I know we're trying to throw so much jargon at you, all these all these terms that sound that nobody ever talks about unless you're in the field. But what you're looking for is basically ag grade. And if you get ag grade, you're getting an ENP of 2,000, which will also give you let's see here, a calcium carbonate equivalent, so that CCE that Karen talked about of 100%.
Right. And there are online calculators that can help you figure out what, depending on which material you're buying, what you have access to. Let's say you live on the coast and you want to use burned oyster shells. What is that equivalency and how much additional, like it's 60 to 80% CCE, depending on what you're buying. And that can there are calculators out there that you can say, hey, this is what I'm buying. This is its CCE. This is what I need as far as tons per acre. How much do I need to apply? And you can get an online calculator to help you with that information. Or you can contact your local extension office and they can help you with that decision as well.
And something about lime that I see people get confused about is we always talk about fineness, right? So people ask, this thing says it's pelletized. So these are really big pellets. How can it work if you're talking about having it go through, a very fine powder mesh like that? And the reason it works, when you buy pelletized lime, what that means is the lime is ground. That calcium carbonate is ground to the point that it's a powder, but then they coat it into small, like little balls, little pellets, and that will dissolve when water hits it. So then that powder then is released while it's already in the soil. So really, when you're buying pelletized lime, the lime isn't that big, but it's just coated in a pellet form so that it's easier to handle. It's easier to spread using a spreader, whether it's a small handheld spreader or it's a large tractor lime spreader.
Yeah, and that's going to make a difference, especially if you're in a very windy area, because when you're trying to spread a flour-like substance in the wind, well, your neighbor's probably going to get more of it than you are. So, you have to look at your environmental conditions as well when you're making these decisions.
Yes, yeah, and pelletized lime, if it's ag grade, it's still that fine powder. It's just in pellet form, so that it's easier to calculate and put down on your property. Now, most soil test labs will differentiate between if you have like a hay field, a big farm versus a small garden, and when you specify what type of why you're doing the soil test, like are you doing this on a small 200 square foot garden, or are you going on 6-acre hayfield, right? They will actually break down the calculations into either 100 square feet or acreage. So it's easier to kind of figure out how much you need. So at least, the lab that we use, Karen, they'll do that. But you can also manually calculate it based on square footage. It's just easier to go by 100 square feet when you're talking about most backyard raised beds.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why it's really important to fill out the soil test form properly. And if you have questions on how to properly fill out a soil test form, contact your local agent. Every state has a different way that they do things. And so your local agent is going to be the best guidance for you. That's what we're here for. And we're trying to make sure that you have this service available to you. So utilize your local agent and reach out to them, and they can help you fill out the soil test form for your garden or for your farm and make sure that you're going to get accurate results. They can even help you find out what your soil type is using a web soil survey. Now you can use this yourself, but some people find it a little difficult to interpret. But yeah, look into web soil survey and you can find your property and get an idea of what your soil type is. Now, again, like we've said before, if you're in an urban or suburban area that's been inhabited for a long period of time, your soil has been changed significantly through human interaction for over 100 years. Maybe you're just going to check urban soil as your soil type because your parent soil type may no longer be influencing it as much as it would be in a rural area.
That's right. And when you're taking that sample, it's really important to make sure you're getting the depth correctly. Because,
that's right.
Remember we were talking about parent material, right? So the deeper you go, the closer you get to that parent material, and the more that parent material affects the chemistry of the soil. So if you're in Western Ohio, the deeper you go, it might even become more neutral. And it all depends on where you are and the soil type that you have. But over here, typically, the deeper you go, the more acidic you get. So you don't want to put too much lime, because having the pH go over 7 will not help you. It could also negatively affect you. Plus, you're spending more money on it. But what you want to make sure you're doing is you want to go to the depth that most of the roots in whatever crop you're growing is. So for a pasture and hay field, 2 to 4 inches is where the grass roots are. That's where you got to neutralize to. If you are doing a 6-inch plus till, you're bringing up that deep soil to the surface. You want to make sure that if you're applying lime, you're getting it all the way down to that 6-inch, 8-inch mark, so that you are neutralizing it all the way down to that point, so you're not bringing acidic soil up. So knowing how far to probe down to get that soil test so that you are neutralizing based on that depth, which is also specified in your soil test. So it will ask you, how deep did you take your sample? Are you planning on tilling? It's going to be a no-till situation. And you check a box that's also then plays a role in calculating how much lime you're going to need, how much ag grade lime you're going to need to get that neutralizing power to that depth as well. So, it's just good to understand, make sure you're doing everything accurate so that you're not overspending and over applying or under applying the lime, because both can be detrimental. So take that into account as well.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that we make very clear the most important thing on your soil test is your contact information, and making sure that it is accurate and legible is really critical, because you can do the greatest soil tests in the world. You can have it very representative of your fields and your garden and send it in, get it dried properly. You've done everything right. If we can't read your contact information, then we can't send you the results of your soil test. So it's really important to make sure that your soil is in one bag and your soil test form is outside of the soil bag, so that it doesn't get wet, because no matter how dry the soil is, when it's in a bag, your paper will get wet. But then make sure it's legible. You take your time, make sure you put all the information in for your contact and your local agent's contact as well, because if they can't read yours, they'll know your local agent and they can get that information to them. So make sure that you're taking your time, printing clearly. And if your printing is horrible, then use a typewriter, or your computer to fill in those blocks, because us being able to read it really makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I always recommend, people that are doing soil tests, because they're always worried about interpreting them and knowing what to buy, and the recommendations they give you aren't necessarily what's available in your area. So,
That's true too.
Just like we were talking about the effective neutralizing power, it might not be the same stuff that they're recommending. So we can make those calculations and help you out there.
That's right. But again, I want to emphasize that make sure you're doing your soil test locally, and you're not from Florida and sending it to West Virginia, because it's going to look totally different. I was looking at some soil tests when we were down at our conference in Florida, and let me tell you, Florida soil ain't nothing like I understand. It is a whole new world, and the pH was 7.2 and the phosphorus was off the charts. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. What's going on here? And I didn't know what to do. So you got to be local with that, and make sure that you are keeping it local. Reach out to your local extension service to help you interpret, or the company that you've hired. A lot of these bigger companies that do soil testing, they have interpretation help as well. So just get advice and make sure that you're following the advice that you've asked for. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.